Showing it is right at noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have a lot of ground to cover today. And so first of all, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate it. This is and I've been really excited about this series. It's been fun planning it and working on it with Houseal Lavigne. But this is our technology and planning webinar series. This is part 2. And it's entitled The Geospatial Advantage. We're going to talk about how we can transform planning workflows through GIS. And so, as I mentioned, this is actually part of a larger series in June. We covered zoning, and then in August, we're going to be covering digital twins. So my name is Keith Cook. I'm the industry manager at Esri for planning and community development. I'm going to be joined today by 3 of my friends from Houseal Lavigne, Brandon Nolan, who's a practice lead, Tricia Parks is the senior planner there, and Robert Kane is the Geospatial Services practice lead. So we're going to cover some really exciting and I think completely relatable and repeatable projects that I think will almost certainly appeal to something that you're doing in terms of your planning workflows. I wanted to provide a little bit of context before we get started, and I promise I won't take up too much of your time on this, but one of the things, and I mentioned this before in our first webinar series, but one of the things that really excites me is how apps are available to planners now and opens up a door of geospatial functionality to them that they really didn't have before. Well, they did, but they had to learn desktop GIS, had to take lots of training by a beefy machine and so forth. Now, in the interest of transparency, we are going to talk a little bit about ArcGIS Pro just to be able to see what can be done. But for the most part, what we're focusing on are web apps and mobile apps that are available to planners, whereby they can provide and leverage their subject matter expertise without having to be GIS experts. So we do that with ArcGIS Urban, ArcGIS Hub, Story Maps, great tool for planners that's been really, really useful in that regard. So what we're going to be talking about again is this geospatial process, and I want to talk a little bit about this geographic approach to planning and what that means for planners. And so again, because I think everything's centered around what we do in planning is centered around location, right? It's impacted by it. We analyze it. We need to visualize it. And so GIS is an integral part. So these are the 5 steps that I think really are key facets to the geographic approach to planning. The first is we have to be able to understand neighborhood characteristics, right? Richard Saul Wurman's the founder of TED Talks. He had a great quote once about how maps are a way to provide understanding, and understanding precedes action. So within the ArcGIS platform, this is either Community Analyst or the Business Analyst web app, but it's a way to provide access to about 2,000 different variables of demographic, socioeconomic information, as well as business data, spending behaviors, market analysis, and so forth. So to me, this is an integral tool of GIS. We had the user conference just last week, and I'm always amazed when people come by and see this, and so many people still don't realize it's out there. But this is still one of my favorite toys. Love using business analysts for that purpose. The second aspect is that we have to be able to derive business intelligence from the business systems that we have within planning. When you talk about business systems, that's almost always, the first thing that comes to mind is almost always going to be, permitting, as it should. It's really the system of record within a lot of planning departments. Now, Esri does not have a permitting system, nor are we going to create one, thankfully. We have some great business partners that do in that regard, but what we can do is we can, regardless of what your permitting system is, we can use GIS to be able to geo-enable that content and be able to extract data over time and be able to see patterns and trends with that data. So the benefit here is using tools like ArcGIS Insights. Even if I'm not the person that works in permitting all the time, I can still see what's going on. I can still see those big picture trends and patterns and be able to make decisions based off of that. And then also in terms of when we talk about getting more value from our existing business systems, a lot of that is optimizing our internal workflows. And so we do a lot of that through ArcGIS Solutions. If you're not familiar with that, the URL is up at the top right. You should be. These are free apps. They're all open source. So we give you access to the code. and they're also configurable and covered by tech support. So I think we have a couple of dozen that are exclusively for planning, and then hundreds more that are in different verticals. But everything, the thing I'm showing up here on the top right is from Arlington, Texas. It's one of their performance management dashboards. It's a great way to communicate to the public and be able to optimize those workflows. This third slide, when we talk about generating policy development, if we were having this discussion 15 years ago, this wouldn't have been on there. But what we've seen over this time is more and more planners are being pulled into, or more and more planning departments are being pulled into these big picture decisions for cities and counties, as they should be, right? And so one of the ways that we help support this is through the ArcGIS Living Atlas, and within that is an app called the Esri Maps for Public Policy. Now, this is a series of curated maps. They're already made, they're ready to go. And they leverage ACS, census data, other data sources as well. And it's a way for you to be able to take a data-driven approach to your policies, being able to understand things like, okay, show me the renters and the owners that have burdensome housing costs in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Where are those? Where are the most burdensome costs, right? And then I can view that content just within the web browser, or I can bring it into my desktop environment if I want. But again, a free resource here to be able to leverage that data and again, push towards more data-driven policy. The fourth one is something that's near and dear to me, and this is about supporting civic inclusion. And basically what this means is that when we talk about a geographic approach to planning, part of it is making sure that we have ways to communicate to the public what's going on in our city and what we're recommending, but not only just to be able to tell people that, we've always been able to do that, but also have a way to be able to get feedback, be it through a free-form comment or a survey or a questionnaire, or even drawing on a map to be able to say, I'd love to see more open space in this area, or we're lacking grocery stores and grocery store access in this neighborhood. Right. So what this drives us towards is more of a partnership between the public and the planning department, so that we're not forcing people to necessarily be there in person for the town hall meeting or the planning commission meeting. Just because they can't get there doesn't mean they don't care about their community, right? So we need to make sure that they have multiple ways to be able to engage and feel like they have a real say-so in terms of how their neighborhood develops. And then the last one, all of this kind of leads to the ability to be able to empower planners to create different scenario plans, to be able to design communities. Again, this is something that 10, 15 years ago absolutely would have required desktop to be able to use or to be able to perform. And now we can do this through a web app like ArcGIS Urban. So this allows us to be able to create multiple scenarios for proposed redevelopments or areas that a city might be looking to annex, repurpose, and so forth. And then we can actually view and analyze the metrics for that development, right? So when we can come up with multiple scenarios, we can say, well, we like scenario 2. And scenario 2 isn't a great idea just because Keith said it was. I've learned the hard way that's not sufficient in a planning department. It's a good idea because we can measure how many people we're going to add, how many households, how many affordable units are we adding, how many jobs are we adding, what's the impact going to be on utilities, on traffic, on tax revenue, and so forth, right? So we're taking this data-driven approach to planning through this approach, and then being able to, again, put before administrators and decision makers the information that they need to make the best decision. Then, of course, we can integrate this with things like CityEngine, make beautiful photorealistic fly-throughs and walkthroughs of developments. And so this to me is, again, this is the last facet of this geographic approach, but it is what really, really draws in a lot of planners. Now, again, as you may have already guessed, this is not just one app that the ArcGIS platform has for planning. There are a number of different apps, and you list them here. You see them listed here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. We are going to see Urban focused on today, ArcGIS Pro, and some others as well. But it's not just software. We're also combining this with services. So Esri, of course, has professional services where we can help with implementation. But here's the thing. We're not a planning practice firm. So we are not rewriting your zoning ordinance. We are not updating your comp plan. I don't have to do that anymore. So we rely on partners like Houseal Lavigne to be able to do that. They have a planning practice that they're combining with GIS. So again, the Esri and the Esri Partner Network have services to be able to help implement these for specific projects. And in the end, what we're doing is we're transforming how the planning department works through ArcGIS. So whether it's just your daily operations, your current planning, or long-range planning, whether you have to empower folks out in the field to be able to register what's going on through code enforcement and inspections, you're involved in policy development, you've got to squeeze just a little bit more value out of that permitting system. You want to make sure that the public is included. ArcGIS is a part of that. And we're going to see that in the rest of the presentation today. I'm going to put my contact information up again later at the end so you can see it. Just wanted to put it up here quickly. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to my friend Brandon Nolan over at Houseal Lavigne. Brandon, you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. I'll start sharing screen here. Is that coming through for everyone?
Yes.
Great. Thanks very much for having us here, Keith. Really looking forward to having this conversation. I'm going to spend a couple minutes just telling everyone who we are as Houseal Lavigne, but the bulk of our time obviously is going to be talking about different case studies, use cases where we can really showcase how the tools you were just highlighting have been integrated into our planning approach, and hopefully give a glimpse at how everyone viewing this webinar can really use those same tools to think a bit differently, think a bit more spatially about the issues they're trying to tackle in their community. So very briefly again, Houseal Lavigne, we're an urban planning and geospatial solutions firm. We work with cities and organizations across the country. We focus on leveraging technology, including GIS, to really provide a geographic and data-driven approach to help our clients address the challenges that they're facing, the very unique challenges that they're facing. So we've worked in a variety of communities across the country, a variety of states. And again, we really do push ourselves to be innovative. And it's not just innovating for innovation's sake, but really trying to use the tools that are constantly evolving to better answer and address in a more efficient way the challenges that we're seeing in the communities we work in. We've worked, again, across the country. These are some of the awards we've won for some of our planning work. But more recently, we've also been starting to be recognized by folks like Esri for our work in GIS. So Robert will actually speak to a project in a couple of minutes from Riverside, California, where we were recently acknowledged for our special achievement in GIS from Esri for that initiative. We're proud to be a gold partner with Esri. We have specialties in urban as well as we have the ArcGIS System Ready specialty. We've won several awards, as I mentioned, as well as the EPC Innovation Award. And but again, really love being able to use the kind of toolkit that Esri has provided to help look at GIS and spatial solutions at a variety of scales. So what we'll walk through today is a few case studies that look at how you can really take GIS to answer questions at a regional scale, at a city scale, at a site level, across a variety of planning topics. So whether it's housing, economic development, equity, providing better transparency in a process, and putting all those pieces together to really, again, take a data-driven approach and make sure you're integrating kind of spatial thinking in GIS into planning. Again, I mentioned the toolkit that Esri provides. So this is something we kind of introduce into our workflows on a daily basis, and we're hoping with today's webinar, you all can kind of see how these tools can be kind of integrated into what you do, whether it's enriching maps in Pro using Living Atlas data or business analyst data. Maybe it's using ArcGIS Hub and dashboards to better communicate the recommendations and the impacts of recommendations within the plans we're helping create. Using map.social, which is a tool we've created for place-based input in survey form. Or maybe it's taking things a step further and developing some immersive environments using Unreal Engine to really, again, help communicate what's being proposed and help people understand the impacts of the decisions. So a little plug for next month, the third installment of this webinar, we'll be talking about those immersive environments, including the Unreal Engine tool we use there. So a quick opening poll before we dive into these case studies, and Dan can help me out here. if you go to the polling section in your browser, we're going to just kind of see what are the tools that you all have been exposed to that you use maybe on a more regular basis. Try to get a sense of the audience here and who has exposure to what aspects of that toolkit we just showcased. And
all right, it looks like we've got about 120 responses in so far. About 25% are using Pro and ArcGIS Online.
Mhm.
Got some folks using dashboards and other tools.
So just a few of you with some urban experience, other Esri tools, a couple folks that are relatively new, not using any GIS tools. Okay, well, so again, we're hoping that today's webinar can really give you a glimpse about how some of those tools are being used. So maybe some of you are familiar with urban, but a lot of you aren't. We'll showcase that with Robert's presentation. And then we'll also be getting into some other, again, integration of GIS throughout these planning processes. Hopefully give you guys a good introduction to the power, I think, of GIS when in regard to planning. So with that, we're going to kick things off with a presentation from Tricia Parks. Unfortunately, Tricia couldn't be here for today's webinar, but she has made a recording. Robert and I will be available for Q&A following the presentation, and we also have some other folks from Houseal Lavigne that were on the project if there are questions specific to Fayette County here. And I should mention Q&A is available, so as questions come up or you think of something, please put it in Q&A. Dan's going to help us answer those or talk about those questions at the end of this presentation. So with that, the first kind of case study we have here is regarding suitability analysis and land planning in Fayette County, West Virginia. This is a comprehensive plan that Houseal Lavigne did with the county. New River Gorge National Park is opening in the county, and it's really helping this region get a better handle on how to prepare for the impacts of that great asset being introduced and recognized rather, and putting them on the right path for long-term land use planning. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tricia, and someone give me a heads up if audio or video is not coming through.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not able to be live with you guys, but I'm happy I'm still able to present today. I'm going to be discussing the development of the future land use plan as part of the Fayette County Comprehensive Plan for Fayette County, West Virginia. So Fayette County is an Appalachian county about 30 minutes east of Charleston. The county is home to the New River Gorge National Park, which is the nation's newest national park designated in 2020. And the national parks designation boosted the county's presence as a destination for visitors, but it also generated some concerns regarding pressures on businesses, housing stock, and infrastructure. In addition to pressures resulting from the national park designation, the county is facing numerous other challenges, namely the loss of population and the decline of the coal industry, which are trends that can be seen across the state. The state of West Virginia requires that communities update their comprehensive plan every 10 years and specifies what sections need to be included. The state requires that each land use section of the comprehensive plan needs to identify different land uses that are appropriate for the community, population density, how growth and decline is going to be managed, and also identify constraints on development. It also needs to include the future land use map that is responsive to these requirements. So we know we need a future land use plan that satisfies state requirements and is also cognizant of the current issues and opportunities facing the county. But we also have another problem, and that is that when talking to residents and stakeholders about the vision for the county and its future, there was a clear divide. So some wanted to preserve the county's character and its beautiful natural areas, while others believed that the county needed more growth and development. So particularly along the Route 19 corridor that had a lot of scenic views. one of which you can see here of the New River Gorge Bridge. So with these considerations, we knew that the county was going to need a data-driven approach to evaluate how to use the land available in the coming decades. So by rooting land use recommendations in data, the plan can unite those two viewpoints, and it also can help to carry forward the county's strengths and assets and strategically plan for growth in the future. So our solution was to utilize Esri's suitability modeler to evaluate land for various land use types using a set of criteria such as environmental conditions, infrastructure, location, proximity to transportation networks, etc., which allowed us to create a land use plan that is grounded in data while addressing the community's needs. So we have a 5-step process to determine land use suitability, which I'm going to go through as part of this presentation. I would like to highlight the shortcomings of the process before I get into it. The first is that your analysis and resulting map is only as good as the data that you have available to you. In this case, we did not start with a lot of data, and it required us to do some searching for reputable and publicly available sources for many instances. Second is that you will need a ArcGIS Pro and spatial analysis extension in order to use the suitability modeler. And finally, it requires a final pass to ensure that the results are making sense, they're realistic, and this does include some subjective assessment. So some things to consider would be community's feedback, growth policies that the community wants to put forward, population projections, and also planning best practices. So first step is the 2 C's. So in this step, we developed a list of constraints and considerations that would factor into the growth and development of the county. The constraints are variables that are unlikely to change and would inhibit development, while considerations are variables that are likely to influence development but would not inhibit it. So if you follow a workflow that is similar to this, you would need to identify constraints and considerations that are specific to your community. So for example, the county has multiple coal mining locations. So this constraint, of course, is not always going to be applicable. Number 2 is plan where you can. So as I mentioned, Fayette County is home to the New River Gorge National Park, as well as many other parks and preserved lands. It also has very steep slopes and both active and inactive mining operations. So we knew that there was going to be a considerable amount of land that should not be considered for growth in the future. And because we were charged with only planning for unincorporated areas, existing municipalities were considered not appropriate for development. So by recognizing areas where key constraints limit growth, we're able to broadly identify areas of the county that were more suitable or desirable for long-term development. So this map shows that about 56% of the county is suitable for development. Step 3 is what should go where. So now that we know where development can occur within the county, we need to determine the best use of that land. So in step 3, we utilize Esri suitability modeler to determine what land uses should go where. And because of land use types have different requirements and different development patterns, we created 3 separate models. One for residential, one for commercial, and one for employment areas. So this allowed us to determine the most appropriate general land use category for all developable parcels within the county. For each model, we had the same list of criteria, which included all the constraints and considerations that we identified in step 1. So I'm not going to go into detail for each one, but I would like to highlight how we weighted preserved land, steep slope, and existing land use. The first is parks and preserved land, which includes the national parks, state parks, conservation easements, wildlife management areas, and also county parks. So not only are these areas protected by federal and state agencies, but they also are very important to many of the residents of the county. So suitability for each of these areas was the same across all 3 land use types. If they're preserved, they are not suitable for development. So that accounts for about 21% of the county's total area. Considering steep slope, commercial and residential tend to be able to be developed on steeper slopes than employment areas. So suitability criteria is same for both of these, both commercial and residential, considering any slope less than 3:1 preferable for development. While employment and industrial areas tend to need larger, flatter land for development. So as you can see, much less of the county is preferable for development when considering steep slopes. Existing land use. So this is considering how the existing land use of a parcel may affect its use in the future. So for residential uses, existing residential is the most preferable for residential use in the future. So you can see the large red areas on the western edge. So those are mining locations, making them unsuitable for residential development. Similarly, the areas used for commercial purposes are the most preferable for commercial uses in the future. I'm sure you know the pattern. Employment in industrial areas are most suitable in areas that are currently used for industrial purposes currently. So you can see that those big red areas have now flipped to green, and a new red area has appeared towards the center of the county. So this is the Route 19 corridor that I mentioned, where many of the residential neighborhoods within the county currently exist. So once we have established the suitability for each criteria, we ran the model to create a suitability model map for each land use type. So we have the results for residential, commercial, and employment areas. So what do we know? We know what areas of the county are most desirable for development, and we know the suitability for residential, commercial, and employment uses for each of these areas. So with this information, we created a predominance map to determine which of the 3 land use types was the most suitable for each parcel. This allowed us to take a data-driven approach to assigning future land use to each suitable parcel within the county. So as you can see, there's a lot of blue. Employment accounted for about 68% of land that was identified as suitable for development. Step number 4 is look at the trends. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, there are a number of challenges that this county is facing that need to be reflected in the future land use plan. So this is where that subjective approach is going to come in. Scaling back recognizes the realities of the county and further filters the likely areas of change based on the understanding of the growth trends, in-person fieldwork, and also local input. So of the 56% of the county that was determined to be suitable for development in step 2, only about 2.5% of that was identified as areas recommended for future growth. Step 5 is the future land use plan. So as part of the planning process, we inventoried the existing land use for each parcel within the county's unincorporated areas. And then by layering the recommended development areas and the existing land use data, we created a future land use map that was rooted in data. So decision makers within the county can confidently use this map and also the comprehensive plan to help make decisions that are going to positively affect the community in the future. So that is the process of how we developed the land use plan for our Fayette County Comprehensive Plan. I'm going to turn it back over to Brandon. I'm confident that everyone on our team could answer any specific questions related to this presentation. Thanks.
Well, thank you again, Tricia. So next we're going to move on to use case for Riverside, California. As I mentioned, this is a project that won Special Achievement in GIS Award recently. And I think Robert's going to take the helm from here. Is that coming through, Robert?
Yeah, I'm not able to control it though, Brandon.
Okay, I'll steer.
Okay. Well, thanks, Brandon. Yeah, so I'm going to take the next couple of minutes to outline and explain our approach, our data-driven approach, using some of the tools that were mentioned by Keith early in the presentation, and also Brandon. This project, next slide, focuses on housing issue, right? So in California, California cities are required to adopt a housing element as part of their general plan. So a general plan in California is very much like a comprehensive plan. In other parts of the country, it has 7 mandatory elements, one of them being the housing element. The housing element needs to be updated every 8 years. And basically, California has a housing crisis, as many communities across the country have, and the cities need to plan and identify housing opportunities. Next slide. ACD estimates housing production has lagged demand by 80,000 units annually over the past 10 years. Next slide. Limited supply has increased home pricing and rents, pricing many people out of the market. HED estimates that 1.5 million people pay 50% or more of their income towards rent in California. In 2021, median home prices exceeded $800,000. To increase supply, cities must identify, as I mentioned, and model and measure areas for housing development. This is part of that housing element process. So basically, the cities have to are assigned a regional housing needs allocation number, right? So the whole entire state, they estimated the housing demand, and then they broke that up and basically divided that up for every city to have their fair share. So they have to program at different income levels. And of course, in a lot of California communities, it's built out. In this case, and what I'm going to kind of walk through is the difficult task that Riverside, California had. They had arena assignment of in excess of 17,000 units. The city is almost completely built out, about 85% built out. And so we were tasked with identifying properties throughout the city that could accommodate growth and housing development. We took a web-based approach. So Tricia talked about a desktop approach using suitability modeler. In this particular case, we used desktop to identify constraints and opportunities, and we put those in a web-based application called ArcGIS Urban. This web-based GIS technology helps you to do data-driven decision-making and iterate and engagement. So we use this tool to approach this hard problem, right? So like I mentioned, we used a couple of tools, ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Urban, and then at the very end of this presentation, we'll talk about how CityEngine was incorporated into this. But really, it's about the data-driven approach, consensus building, telling the story, and then delivering those outcomes to the populace or to the decision makers to get so that they feel confident in their decision-making process. There's a couple slides of some of the applications we used. So again, on that first slide, and we'll share that in the chat later on, there's a link to a story map, again, an Esri technology that's used to tell stories. It's a web-based storytelling tool, and this is a screenshot of that. And what this screenshot here represents are the opportunity sites that we identified through data-driven process using the suitability modeler. Next slide. Much like what Tricia explained in the process they used for Fayette, we had to identify hazards, constraints, and opportunities. And this map right here illustrates all of the criteria that went into a suitability model, right? So we used flood and fire risk and conservation areas, airport compatibility zones, and then of course zoning. Next slide. And then again, this is opportunity. So housing sites, especially for the lower income, need to be highly amenitized. And what I mean by amenitized is they have to have good access to transit, job centers, and healthy food, and then open space and recreation. So this map starts to show the opportunity areas, right? Those areas that are amenitized and have access to some of these amenities. Next slide. And ultimately, it gets down to the land uses, right? So taking those factors as constraints and opportunities and looking at that against the existing land uses. In this particular slide, we're showing a sub area of the city, a ward, ward number 3, and what the land use makeup is, right? So we're looking at this in a viewer, ArcGIS Urban, on the web. So we coordinated and collaborated with staff. They didn't need to have GIS software local. They could use and investigate this plan through a web browser. Next slide. What are some of the things that we did? So this is a shot of the suitability tool. So Tricia had mentioned a suitability analysis on desktop. This is what the suitability tool looks like in ArcGIS Urban. And as you can see here, we can iterate or adjust that suitability, right? So one of the powerful things in ArcGIS Urban is that building a suitability model, you can go do the what if, right? So you can change factors. In this particular screenshot, we're just showing year constructed, right? Year constructed as being an indicator of potential redevelopment. And you see in the screenshot there of the parcels, it starts to identify those parcels based on that suitability criteria. And we use that suitability criteria, multiple faceted suitability criteria, to identify those properties that are suitable for redevelopment or have high potential for redevelopment and construction of housing. And then basically, one of the other tools that Urban can do is it's a scenario tool, right? So we're looking here at two different scenarios side by side of different land use programming, right? So we identified some sites, and then we started to show the programming of the proposed zones, just looking and investigating the existing zoning criteria to see what opportunities and what outcomes could come from just using the existing zoning. And this sort of compares like just jobs as being a change agent, right? Showing opportunities for housing. And so in these two particular scenarios right here, there's very just incremental change, but it's a way to look at each section of the city and kind of look at that potential and kind of look at what your outcomes could be. Because keep in mind, for the RENA, we had to program, we had a goal, right? We had a breakdown that we needed to meet. So we were able to interactively work with staff. And that was one of the key elements to the success of this project, is working with staff. Staff understands the community better than a consultant that comes in for 1 year to 2 years to engage on this project. So we worked with that mind share of the staff to work through processes and zoning outcomes to get a best fit to meet that RENA goal. Next slide. And with ArcGIS Urban, it also models in 3D. So what you see here is it's taking the existing zoning and the site development characteristics and producing some potential volumes, right? So You can see on the slide on the left side, that's existing zoning, what you could expect, based on setbacks and height restrictions and other zoning site criteria. And then on the right, we changed those criteria to see what the future potential would be. And when these are changed, you get a dashboard or derivatives of what the potential units or the potential non-residential square footage was. So we started to play with that. So we looked at zoning, then we looked at changing densities and changing zoning criteria to see how we could meet those RENA goals. Next slide. Once we kind of had that scenario in place, we went to the 3D view. This is a 3D view of the city with the white buildings represent the existing conditions. And you see here we've identified a site for potential. We can then select that site and apply a zoning scenario on that site and multiple sites of the same zoning designation to identify derivatives. Again, these aren't the buildings. This isn't designing. This is just representing potential volume so that you can start to calculate what you could expect your outcome to be. And plus kind of looking at how it fits into the existing urban form. That's very important, right? It's density, but it's infill density. And how does that fit into the existing urban form? Next slide. So with that being said, to further investigate the opportunities here, you see we used ArcGIS, CityEngine, which is a procedural modeling tool. Take it to that next level, right? So we identified a site, we identified a goal. In this particular case, it was 163 units. And, what does that look like? How would that work? Is it possible? And through using some modeling tools and some assumptions based on the zoning, we were able to create this 3D depiction very quickly, rather quickly, I should say, to investigate that. Next slide. And what's nice about this is it's a web scene that's interactive that you can scroll around the property and investigate, zoom in, pan around, explode the view to see the components, right? So you see at the very bottom, there's commercial uses, and then above are the residential uses, how it's parked. And one of the key aspects of this site was, can the city wanted to know, can they keep that commercial, that restaurant on the corner? And we were able to demonstrate pretty rapidly how that could be accomplished. Next slide. And yeah, again, just another view. So we handed this off to the decision makers. We shared this with the community, and they were able to view this in a web browser. And again, one of the key of all this technology, the urban and CityEngine, is all of this is accessible to the public, the decision makers, and staff through a browser. They didn't have to install any tools or any applications. They were able to use the web browser to investigate. And we use this also in combination with surveys to gain consensus. And so that's sort of the kind of the workflow real rapidly. Again, we'll share that link to that story map that you can look through the whole process in more detail for Riverside. And back to you, Brandon.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Robert. So we've shown you a couple examples, again, that the regional scale site suitability using some desktop tools, using online tools, using Urban and CityEngine. We're going to kind of wrap up here with a couple case studies that really look at kind of how you can communicate and tie pieces together using different levels of analysis. In this case, we're talking about the comprehensive plan that was undertaken for Fort Wayne and Allen County. This was a joint comprehensive plan. But before we dive into that, I don't know how many of you are all familiar with the comprehensive plan processes, or in California, the general plan process. So do a quick poll question here about the kind of status of current comprehensive plans. So Dan's going to populate that for us. So pretty good mix so far. A lot of you done in the last year. Some are thinking about it and kind of a mixed bag in between, and then 27%, a quarter of you are other. Okay, so for those who've done the last year, I mean, hopefully you can see, you've seen the value of integrating some of these tools. And for those who are working on it or it's coming up, one of the interesting things about comprehensive plans, they are required to be updated every 5 to 10 years, depending on the state. And that means a lot can change within the GIS kind of environment. So the things we were doing 10 years ago in a comprehensive plan are very different than today. And we'll show you a couple examples where you can really enrich the process with data and GIS in a way that you couldn't have done it a few years ago. So for those who are thinking about it, or you know it's way out of date, the good news is there's a lot of cool things you can really integrate into the process as you kind of embark on the next round. So briefly, kind of intro to this process. If you want to check out, the client has made their own hub site or story map for the project. It's allinallen.org. So that's where the plan itself lives. But this was a joint plan between the city of Fort Wayne, Allen County, and then another 5 adopting communities. And so it's really a unique opportunity to kind of provide policy and direction on both sides of the municipal line. More oftentimes than not, as a consultant or as a planner working for a government, you're only working on your side of that city limit or that village limit. And so this is really cool opportunity to kind of talk about a regional vision and how all can kind of work towards that same end goal. This project started basically right as COVID was hitting. We had a great round of workshops opening up, and we had another round of workshops planned for March 2020. And then, as everyone knows, the world kind of stopped spinning there for a minute. So we were able to get over 3,300 points of interaction, which I think is phenomenal given the context, especially, and we reached over 140 organizations. The map on the right here is actually showing we're taking some of the input we got from some short form surveys we did in person in postcards, collected those, and then we inputted the place information for zip code to get kind of some sentiment analysis done using ArcGIS to help us get an understanding of who cares about what in which part of town. But main point being, great amount of outreach was undertaken. We did get some kind of key themes that really emerged in this process. A couple of those I want to touch about today. The concept of a 15-minute neighborhood or a complete neighborhood. So the community really rallied around the idea of encouraging reinvestment in existing neighborhoods and looking at how to maybe rethink future development. Allen County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country. So they are facing a lot of growth pressure, not quite as much as what we're seeing in California, but a lot of growth pressure and new housing coming online every day. And so the community is really starting to see the impacts of that on the rural character of this, traditionally somewhat rural county, and really basically seeing ag land being eaten up. This is some of the most productive ag land in the country as well. So there's definitely this pressure to try to find a balance between what we're seeing in terms of needing to accommodate new development, but also preserve that ag land. And then Southeast Fort Wayne, this is an area, it's a majority minority portion of the city of Fort Wayne, and low-income area has really seen disinvestment, and it really rose to the top in engagement as being an area that folks wanted to see that tide kind of turn. It was being viewed as a regional economic development issue. There was a survey done by Greater Fort Wayne Inc., which is their kind of regional business and economic development group. And even the business community highlighted Southeast Fort Wayne as a key issue of impacting the kind of bigger, longer term health of their economy. So from multiple angles, we were seeing Fort Wayne really rise to the top. And it kind of coincides, as we'll see in the data here, with this concept of the complete neighborhood. So one of the things we wanted to get to, as we heard from the community, hey, we care about this idea of a complete neighborhood or a 15-minute community. We wanted to use the data to kind of showcase maybe where some of those areas exist already in the county. So working with our team, we pulled together a series of inputs to create an index to basically say, hey, if we look at access to public safety facilities, if we look at parks and rec, medical facilities, schools, these different assets that really help round out a community and provide the services that provide for high quality of life that people are saying they want to see. where do those neighborhoods exist right now? So we created an index looking at network distance to these different facilities to really basically highlight those key complete neighborhoods. And as you'll see in the middle of this map, the dark blue basically highlights these historic core neighborhoods that were built up around downtown Fort Wayne, as well as a couple of other nodes, but predominantly around that downtown where you have this tremendous kind of aggregation of all these great assets that really make it easy to have a quality kind of living experience within your neighborhood. Conversely, what we were seeing is a lot of the development happening because this is again, a high growth area. They're not building up too much, they're building out. And so this is a hotspot analysis of building permits, along with some polygons for where they're having some rezonings. But what we're able to demonstrate is that all the new builds that are happening are, for the most part, in areas that do not overlap with that kind of complete community idea. So there's a lot of potentially a lot of infrastructure that's going to have to be built in these high growth areas that isn't there already. So it's really putting pressure on the various municipalities in the county to provide infrastructure, to provide investment in schools and fire and police and in parks, basic infrastructure like water and sewer. These are things that don't exist a lot in these areas other than maybe basic necessities like the water and sewer. So that shows kind of a misalignment between where new investment's happening and the values we're hearing from the community around this idea of a complete neighborhood. Tying that back to the story for Southeast Fort Wayne, another piece we wanted to look at is, all right, yes, the community values these areas from a kind of a qualitative standpoint. What's the data say? And so we looked at the assessed value information being provided by the county assessor. And what that showed is, and here we've aggregated that by block group, and then we extruded it, just trying to help tell a good story as part of the planning process. So we thought this visual really helped communicate the impacts of having that quality infrastructure to the broader public. So the darker the blue, the higher the polygon, the more value you have per acre within the community. And you can see, obviously, the downtown is kind of anchoring the region, but we also noticed areas like the kind of lower left area to the south of downtown here, where you can really see that infrastructure kind of paying off. So a lot of those core neighborhoods, again, are where we have that complete community index being ranked really high. And it's also the same areas that have that high index for being a complete community, also have very high per acre value. So the data is matching what the community is saying they value. We're seeing this alignment where turns out if you build a community a certain way, it definitely kind of self-sustains and provides that value. With that said, you can also see on the kind of lower portion of this image, this light blue here, those are areas in Southeast Fort Wayne that have seen that disinvestment over the last several decades. In terms of a kind of historic character and origin, they're almost identical to this area we have here. This is for Foster Park. Very same block structure, proximity to parks, schools, access to the downtown, a lot of great things going for this neighborhood, but it's not valued at all the same way. So we really use this in the planning process to showcase kind of a mismatch between what we're seeing on the ground and then what the community is saying they value. And basically to make the case that yes, Southeast Fort Wayne needs help, but it also has tremendous potential. So here, basically the dividing line between this darker blue and this light blue area, if you were to zoom in those blocks, you can see the assessed value per acre was almost $224,000 on the west side in Polygon A, and only about 88,000 to the right or to the east in B. So dramatic difference for buildings and blocks that look almost identical across the street from one another. So again, a marriage of data and storytelling to really kind of help connect the dots between what we're hearing in the outreach and what the plan kind of needs to recommend. So one of the things, or one of the aspects that's really excited to me about the evolution of GIS over the last several years is we're now able to not just talk to people and say, yeah, this is important to you, but we can also now find the data that helps illustrate that, or to counteract it and say, well, you say you care about this, but this is what we're seeing in the data, and let's have a conversation. But GIS has really enabled us to have that kind of data-driven and enriched discussion with the community. And I'm going to go very briefly here. I know we're running a little long on time. Just want to touch briefly on some web-based engagements and really highlight the dashboards as a communication tool. So map.social is a tool that Houseal Lavigne has created, is now available on the Azure Marketplace. It's been there for several years, but it's a place-based mapping tool. Really lets you provide input, down to the site level across a variety of platforms. You can highlight community assets, key transit destinations. You can use polygons, polylines, really help basically create your own map of what you want to see happen in your community. And it's information we can share with our clients. So we're collecting this during a planning process, and you can run some pretty interesting analyses to really see, what are the areas or things that people are highlighting from a problematic standpoint, from an asset standpoint. But we've also worked on creating dashboards so that our clients, municipalities, county governments can take that information and really see what's happening in a real-time perspective. And so dashboards have become a really cool tool over the last couple of years that we're excited about, because it's something that helps us better communicate and helps clients monitor what's happening, but it's also a communication device for the public. This is some work that we've developed with the city of Dallas as they're undertaking their land use plan. They're using a dashboard we created to help monitor input. So they're doing a ton of in-person engagement, meeting with hundreds of people, and they're tracking demographic information, and they're using the dashboard to basically enter information, see the real-time result from them inputting the data, and understand, hey, this area is underrepresented in our process, or we're really not seeing Black or Latino voices in this neighborhood, even though we would expect to based on demographics. So their outreach team is using this tool to help modify their approach throughout the process and kind of create an iterative engagement process. And then last but not least, this is an urban model that's being developed with the city of Dallas, but we're using this as kind of a public facing tool where we can basically showcase recommended changes to land use and what the differential would be in terms of accommodating households or jobs or daily trip generation. So the dashboards are great because you can use them as an internal tool as well as an external communication piece. But with that, I think it's time for Q&A. We did have one final poll, if Dan wants to pull that up. And it's really, I think, about kind of any hesitance in working with the tools we've showcased today. The response is coming in. We can't afford it. About 30% need the talent or the people to implement, technical capacity and time. All right, so a mixed bag, but afford it and having the people on time to implement or maintain seeming to be leaders right now. All right, staying pretty steady. So I'll hand it off to Keith here, but.
Oh, see, Dan beat me to it. I was going to say we need to. I wanted to make sure everyone's contact information was there. We covered a lot of ground, and I know Brandon and Robert and probably Tricia as well could have talked another 30 minutes about what they did, and they only hit the tip of the iceberg. So we just kind of wanted to make sure you had some ideas of what can be done with GIS, and again, pretty standard planning practices here. So the contact information is here, the QR code here to be able to register for our next series in August on digital twins will be there. But I feel comfortable speaking for Brandon and Tricia and Robert. Our goal is to make sure that you're successful in what you do. So we want you to make sure to reach out, ask questions. You do not get bonus points in this field for spinning your wheels or reinventing the wheel. So reach out, ask questions. That's what we're here for, here to make sure you're successful. So with that, Dan, if there's nothing else, I think we can go ahead and probably call it a wrap. And we look forward to seeing everyone for the third and final installment of our summer seminar series in August. And again, you can use the QR code to be able to register for that. So again, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day, and thank you for spending some time with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.